Now, whether Donald Trump is, for some reason, being kept out of the loop on some of the details of the war in Iran, or is just generally out of touch with its details, or simply unwilling to acknowledge the tragic consequences of the war, is anyone's guess. What we do know, though, is that his claims about the war in Iran have, in some instances, become so far-fetched and absurd that reporters are able to knock them down in seconds of questioning. More damaging, politically at least, to Trump, as the human cost of the war grows, with 8 U.S. service members having lost their lives and more than 140 service members now injured, Donald Trump's own base is not buying what he's selling. Case in point, yesterday, Donald Trump was asked about the bombing of an Iranian girls' school. 175 people were killed. Many of them were children. Multiple outlets report that the United States is likely responsible for that strike. But Donald Trump claimed that Iran might have used a missile created by the United States to strike their own school-aged children. Take a listen to what New York Times reporter Sean McCreesh asked and Donald Trump's response.
Hey, Mr. President, you just suggested that Iran somehow got its hands on a Tomahawk and bombed its own elementary school on the first day of the war. But you're the only person in your government saying this. Even your defense secretary wouldn't say that when he was asked, standing over your shoulder on your plane on Saturday. Why are you the only person saying this?
Because I just don't know enough about it. I think it's something that I was told is under investigation. But Tomahawks are used by others, as you know. Numerous other nations have Tomahawks. They buy them from us. But I will certainly, whatever the report shows, I'm willing to live with that report.
I'll stop telling lies as soon as a report is shown to me, and then I'll just read from the report. Okay. The reporter there, again, is Sean McCreesh from the New York Times, and he pointed out, importantly, not even Donald Trump's Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, is saying what Trump is saying, and that is saying something in and of itself. The bombing has become a point of rupture with Donald Trump's MAGA base, some of its most prominent members, many of whom were already skeptical of the war with Iran to begin with. Fox News' Laura Ingraham posted on social media that the Trump administration must investigate and address the bombing head on. She called it a, quote, horrible unintended tragedy of this war, end quote. So on this question, at least, they seem to have lost Laura Ingraham. Tucker Carlson is a prominent critic of Donald Trump's war in Iran. He posted this scathing video. Watch.
The bombing of a girls' school next to an Iranian naval base that was apparently the school of choice for officers at the naval base. These were the children, the daughters of the people we're fighting. You have to believe that was accidental, despite the fact it was hit twice, 40 minutes apart. Looks very much like a double tap, which is to say a bombing and then an attack on the people coming to rescue the injured. But as an American, you have to believe this was a tragic mistake. But we have to verify that, because if you wake up in the morning and you're living in the kind of country that thinks it's okay to kill not simply military officers, but their daughters, that country's not worth fighting for.
Wow. So the deep skepticism Donald Trump is facing, again, from some of the most prominent and powerful voices inside his own coalition at home, comes as Donald Trump's contradictory statements on what the goals or endgame of the war are, his seesawing between promising escalation, things like the worst is yet to come, and then looking for an off-ramp, telling CBS yesterday it was almost over. Those statements look less and less tethered to real things happening on the ground in Iran or any strategy by the day, given that the Iranian regime shows no signs of backing down. Iran's foreign minister told PBS News this, quote, I don't think the question of talking with Americans or negotiation with Americans once again would be on the table, because we have a very bitter experience of talking with Americans. That is where we start today with New York Times correspondent Sean McCreesh. Also joining us, former DHS Chief of Staff during Donald Trump's first term, Miles Taylor's here. With me at the table for the hour, Lieutenant General Mark Hertling is here. He served as the commanding general of the U.S. Army in Europe. Sean, your question, and I'm sure you didn't intend to become part of the story at all, so I'll apologize in advance for our coverage of your part of that. But it did seem like an important distinction that on this matter, he's the only one saying that the Iranians bombed the girls' school. Is that still their position?
Yeah, so it was interesting. I was asking administration officials all week, and the administration had a line, which was that it's under investigation and that the United States would never purposefully target civilians in that way. But Trump himself had not been asked, and so I was on Air Force One on Saturday, and we were coming back from Dover, and he came back, and I looked at him and asked about it, and he just spit out this thing that it was Iran who was responsible, and I was sort of stunned when he said it because nobody had said that. And, Pete Hegseth was just over his shoulder as it was happening, so I turned and looked at him, and he would not repeat what Trump was saying, and the look on his face, I think, was revealing in and of itself.
What is your understanding of whether there's an actual investigation into the 2 strikes on the girls' school?
I don't know what the status of the investigation is. Caroline Leavitt was asked about that just now at the briefing. Why is it still ongoing? We're, 9 days into the war now, and this happened on the first day. I think people are wondering, what's happening with that. But Trump himself did say to me yesterday that he'll accept whatever the results of the investigation are.
What is your sense of why they have not settled on a rationale for why they went to war in Iran?
I don't know. The messaging is all over the place, even about the timeline of it. So it still seems like they haven't all gotten on the same page. Today, some of the things they were saying seemed like they were walking back some of the stated objectives. You don't hear them talking about regime change as much anymore. It just seems like they're saying they want to wipe out their attack capabilities. But, many questions abound still.
What was the most interesting thing you heard from Trump yesterday?
On that exchange, I think it was interesting that he sort of backed down a little bit at the end and wobbled. But I felt like when he came out and began speaking to us, I was thinking that he was going to announce he was winding down. It sounded like he was sort of congratulating himself and there was going to be a big but coming. And then it never happened. And so even though it was the first press conference he did since taking the country to war, there was a sense from reporters in the room that we were all sort of scratching our heads at the end of it, like, what was the point of any of that? It was all over the place.
I mean, I had that sense going into it. I mean, he's been the most incomprehensible messenger. I mean, Rubio went to the Hill in the early day, the first Monday after the initial strikes, and seemed to say we are at war in Iran because Israel was going to strike anyway. Lindsey Graham was on TV talking about how he went to Bibi Netanyahu and told him how to talk Trump into it. I mean, do they still feel like Trump is in control of the war in Iran?
Was he ever in control? It's interesting because Trump is actually such a brilliant messenger. Anyone who's covered him these last 10 years knows this. He really can oftentimes tap into public sentiment. He knows how to drive a message. He's sort of branding genius. But this subject, it feels he's bitten off more than he can chew here. And even he doesn't seem to know exactly what he wants out of this or when he wants it to end. And there's an almost Kafkaesque quality to hearing him talk about the timeline at this point. It's short, it's long, it's forever, it's however long I want it to be. It's sort of head-spinning, isn't it?
It is. Yesterday he got on the phone, I think it was CBS, and said it was almost over. And then ahead of that 5:30 press conference, he seemed to walk it back. Are they sensitive to the stock market on any of this?
How could they not be?
Yeah, that's my sense, too. Let me bring the others into the conversation. General Hertling, I mean, Sean sort of made my point or sort of articulated what my argument was going into this, that Trump is the least. It's like he's someone's grandpa at home watching the war coverage on Fox and shouting at the TV. His utterances don't seem to be tethered to unclassified versions of PDBs. His utterances don't seem to be tethered to any calls to the region. I mean, he has held himself up as having close alliances in the region. He doesn't seem to have any, doesn't ever talk about what other leaders are dealing with. I mean, there are bombs and projectiles landing at the airports and hotels of some of our and his closest allies in the region. He seems to get up and say things that as Sean says, Pete Hegseth isn't even saying.
Yeah, there's not a whole lot of forethought. Is there? One of the things going to the strike at the girls' school I find fascinating It's just a lack of understanding of the levers of government and what his directorates, his departments do. And he should know, if he's in control of the military as the commander-in-chief, that any kind of incident like this will drive an investigation. The military will do it without being told to do it. I mean, in combat for multiple years myself, there was always the occasion where something happened. It's like, oh, did we screw that up? Or let's find out, whether it was a fratricide or a missile going somewhere it shouldn't. You investigate it and you get the details. For him to stand up before an investigation starts and said, oh, yeah, it wasn't us, and then a day later says, well, somebody told me there's an investigation. Yeah, no kidding. There's always an investigation, and you shouldn't say it wasn't us until you get the results of the investigation. That's kind of breaking it down. But the connection, though, Nicole, is the fact that he seems to have a Secretary of Defense that doesn't want to tell him what's really going on, other than show him war porn. You know, the flicks of things blowing up and killing people and giving details and statistics. But there's a whole lot more to conflict and combat than just those kind of things. And it doesn't seem, like you say, he's not interested in any of that. He's just interested in the marketing plan, as Sean just said.